The frozen Belgian forest pressed down on Staff Sergeant Robert Mariam as he made his way through the pre-dawn darkness on December 16, 1944. The thermometer had plummeted well below freezing, and the earth beneath his boots had turned to concrete. 28 months of European combat had taught him to trust his gut, and something about this morning felt wrong in a way he couldn't quite name. The sector he was patrolling should have been quiet, not silent. The Ardennes were never truly silent during December of 1944, but ordinary. The distant rumble of artillery, the occasional crack of a sniper's rifle, the low murmur of men huddled in foxholes trying to stay warm. That's what he expected to hear. Instead, the pre-dawn hours had brought something unnatural, an absence that seemed to press against his eardrums like an accusation. Then came the voices. They cut through the darkness at 3:47 a.m. shouting for help. American voices. Unmistakably so. Mariam raised his fist, stopping his four-man patrol in their tracks. He strained to listen, his Thompson submachine gun held at the ready. The accents were flawless. A flat-voweled Indiana farm boy asking for a tow cable, a Brooklyn mechanic cursing the mud with nasal precision, a Virginia officer speaking in that refined drawl that marked the educated South. Every detail rang true to a man who had been listening to American voices for nearly 3 years. "Sounds like our boys got themselves in a fix," whispered Private Henderson, the youngest member of Mariam's squad. Mariam nodded but kept his weapon ready as they moved toward the voices. The ground fog was thick enough to obscure movement until the last moment. What emerged from that mist looked exactly like what it claimed to be: 3 American soldiers beside a Sherman tank that had thrown its right track. Their fatigues were mud-stained and worn. Their faces bore that hollow exhaustion that came from too much marching through bad weather and too little sleep. The officer, a lieutenant with prematurely grey temples, stepped forward with his hand raised in greeting. His name tape read Hayes. He claimed to be from the 9th Armoured Division. "Thank God you found us, Sergeant," he said. "We've been trying to get back to our unit since yesterday morning." Mariam's eyes moved across the 3 men like a man reading a document. The officer's bars were properly tarnished, not the bright brass that would mark a replacement fresh from the States. His combat infantry badge showed the right amount of wear. His cigarettes, Lucky Strikes protruding from his breast pocket, bore the authentic markings of a PX ration rather than black market stock. The corporal, Murphy according to his name tape, was stocky and solid. He gestured at the disabled track with the easy competence of a man who understood machinery. "Damping's been giving us trouble since we pulled out near St. Vith," he said. "Pin finally sheared around midnight. Left us sitting ducks if Jerry decides to make an appearance." The private from Indiana, Williams was his name, had the earnest enthusiasm of someone barely old enough to shave. "We got separated during an artillery barrage yesterday evening. Been trying to navigate by dead reckoning, but this fog's got us turned around." For 30 minutes, the conversation unfolded with the ease and familiarity of American soldiers helping American soldiers. Mariam shared hot coffee from his thermos boots, while the tank crew explained their predicament. They complained about the cold with that ritualistic intensity that bonded men together in foxholes and in the dark. Murphy showed the technical competence of a veteran mechanic. Williams spoke with homesick longing about spring planting season on his father's farm. The lieutenant produced a folded map case. He asked for directions to Malmedy, where he believed his parent unit had established a command post. Mariam studied the map, noting the proper military grid coordinates and standard engineer markings. Everything about it looked authentic. The coffee stains, the pencil notations, the wear patterns that accumulated on maps during active operations. "Your best bet is heading north on this road about 8 miles, Mariam explained, tracing the route with his finger. "Should intersect the main supply route about 2 clicks east of Malmedy proper. Radio frequency for 1st Army traffic control is 47.2 MHz, if you can raise anybody." The conversation drifted through the topics that occupied every American soldier's mind that winter. Hayes mentioned letters from his wife in Richmond describing rationing problems and victory gardens. Murphy talked about his brother's job in the Brooklyn Navy Yard and family dreams of buying a house in Queens after the war. Williams spoke wistfully about holiday preparations back home in Fort Wayne. about his sister's letters describing sugar rationing affecting cookie production. As Mariam's squad prepared to move on, Hayes mentioned something almost in passing. They were heading to rejoin the 23rd Armored Division once they reached Malmedy. The word struck Mariam like a physical blow. He had spent the previous 3 weeks memorizing unit designations for every American formation in the Ardennes sector. First Army intelligence briefings had drilled him on identifying friendly units to prevent fratricide. He knew the 2nd Armored, the 3rd Armored, the 4th Armored, the 9th Armored. There was no 23rd Armored Division. Mariam's mind raced through the possibilities. Maybe the lieutenant had misspoken under stress. Maybe he meant the 23rd Infantry Regiment. But no, Hayes had been precise and confident, speaking with the easy familiarity of an officer discussing his own organization. 23rd Armored, Mariam repeated carefully, watching Hayes's face for any flicker of recognition that he'd made an error. That's right, Sergeant, Hayes replied without hesitation. Been with them since Louisiana maneuvers back in '42. Hell of an outfit. No American armored officer would confuse his division's designation. That detail was too fundamental, too deeply embedded in military identity. It couldn't be forgotten. It couldn't be misstated. Mariam nodded and smiled, giving no indication that anything was wrong. Well, good luck finding your unit, Lieutenant. Stay safe out there. But as the tank crew gathered their equipment and prepared to move out, Mariam was already reaching for his radio handset. He waited until their voices faded into the morning fog before he transmitted. Baker 72, this is Charlie 401, 3 personnel in American uniforms heading your direction in about 20 minutes. Question them about unit designation and verify with headquarters before allowing passage. The response crackled back immediately. Roger, Charlie 401. Any specific concerns? Mariam watched the 3 figures disappear into the mist. Negative specific concerns. Just verify everything before you let them pass. Within hours, similar reports would flood across American communication networks throughout the entire Ardennes front. MPs claiming authority they didn't possess. GIs at checkpoints who couldn't answer basic questions about American government and military organization. Tank crews carrying perfect equipment but lacking the unconscious knowledge that came from growing up American. Hitler hadn't simply launched a ground offensive through the Ardennes forests. He had sent an army of counterfeit American soldiers deep into Allied territory. Men armed with forged documents, wearing captured uniforms, equipped with authentic weapons. They'd undergone months of intensive cultural training. They sounded American. They looked American. They possessed equipment that passed inspection, but their perfection contained a fatal flaw that no amount of preparation could overcome. Technical Sergeant Joseph Morrison stamped his feet against the bitter cold as he manned his checkpoint on the Elsenborn Ridge Road at 6:30 a.m. on December 17th. The 99th Infantry Division MP had processed dozens of vehicles since dawn, each requiring the same routine verification, unit identification, destination, proper authorization documents. After 18 months of combat duty, the procedure had become mechanical, but radio traffic had been suggesting increased vigilance was necessary. 3 figures approached through the morning mist, their breath visible in white puffs as they walked with the measured pace of military police conducting official business. Morrison recognized the bearing immediately, MPs confident in their authority. Their uniforms displayed proper insignia, white helmet liners, leather belts, regulation .45 caliber pistols in spotless holsters. The senior man, a staff sergeant according to his chevrons, stepped forward with a clipboard tucked under his arm. Morning, Sergeant. Staff Sergeant Williams, 2nd MPs. We're conducting security sweeps for infiltrators. Need to pass through your sector immediately. Morrison studied the 3 men with professional interest. Their equipment looked flawless. Williams carried an authentic military clipboard with proper forms. His weapon showed the right amount of field wear. Even his ammunition pouches displayed the correct spacing that came from months of combat experience. The other 2 MPs, a corporal and a private, maintained proper military bearing while scanning the checkpoint perimeter with alert attention. Haven't received any notification about MP sweeps in this area, Morrison replied. checking his logbook for special instructions. Williams nodded with patient understanding. Orders came down from 1st Army headquarters about 3 hours ago. Probably haven't reached all checkpoints yet. You know how it is with radio traffic during active operations. The explanation sounded reasonable. Morrison had witnessed numerous instances of delayed communications during combat, particularly when multiple units operated in close proximity. 1st Army headquarters routinely dispatched security teams without notifying every checkpoint, especially during fluid tactical situations. "Where are you boys from originally?" Morrison asked, keeping his tone casual as he moved through the standard questions that protocol demanded. "Detroit," Williams answered promptly without hesitation. "Born and raised on the east side," he continued. Morrison felt something click into place. "Dearborn," he said. "That's home for me, just outside the city limits." Before the war, he'd spent countless afternoons roaming through Detroit's neighborhoods, watching games out at Briggs Stadium, pulling summer shifts in the automotive plants where half the city seemed to work. Running into a fellow Michiganer felt like pure luck. He couldn't resist the opening. "You follow the Tigers?" "Of course," Williams replied immediately. "Great team. Been a fan since I was a kid." Morrison nodded like he was satisfied, but his mind was working differently now, turning things over with the kind of precision that had kept him breathing through 18 months of combat. He was listening to the words, sure, but he was also listening to what was underneath them, and something felt thin about it. Every genuine Detroit native carried baseball in their bones. It wasn't just about liking a team. The Tigers meant something deeper. They were woven into neighborhood conversations, factory break rooms, the kind of arguments that happened in bars over drinks after a shift. They represented pride in your city, loyalty to your people, the shared culture that bound working-class Detroiters together. A real fan wouldn't just say they liked the team. They'd launch into specifics without thinking. Recent games, favorite players, complaints about management, the passionate intensity of someone who'd grown up debating batting averages and pitching records. A real fan would give you details that came from the heart, not from a script. Williams's response had been correct, but generic, stripped of the emotional specificity that authentic fandom carried. It was the kind of answer someone would give if they'd memorized the right thing to say without understanding what it meant. Morrison kept his expression friendly while his suspicions hardened into something close to certainty. "Well, you fellas better keep moving," he said casually. "Those security sweeps are important, and the roads are going to get busier once the supply convoys start rolling through." Williams thanked him for his time, and the 3 MPs moved down the road with the confident stride of men who belonged there, conducting legitimate military business. Morrison watched them until they disappeared around the bend. Then he reached for his radio handset. "Tango 61, this is Romeo 47, 3 MPs heading southeast on Ridge Road. They're claiming security sweeps, but I detained them for questioning about baseball. Something's wrong with the answers." The radio crackled back almost immediately, and a voice asked him to specify his concerns. Morrison took a moment, knowing how this would sound. His intuition was based on something subtle, a single conversation that felt off to someone who'd grown up breathing Detroit baseball culture. But that subtle wrongness could mean the difference between security and catastrophe. "Ask them who won the American League pennant this year," he said into the handset. "The answer is St. Louis Browns." Any Detroit Tigers fan would know that without hesitating. 15 minutes later, Morrison received his confirmation. The 3 MPs had been stopped at the next checkpoint and failed basic questions about American baseball. Under interrogation, they'd broken. German commandos, trained in English, equipped with captured uniforms and equipment. The real deal. Word of what Morrison had done spread through the military communication networks faster than anyone could have predicted. Staff officers who dismissed infiltration warnings suddenly understood that the threat was both real and sophisticated. If German agents could master American uniforms, obtain authentic equipment, and study military procedures until they could execute them flawlessly, then traditional security methods weren't going to catch them. Morrison had stumbled onto something fundamental about cultural identity. German intelligence had focused on everything observable: uniforms, equipment, military procedures. the formal knowledge that existed in manuals and handbooks. They'd trained their commandos relentlessly until those agents could replicate every surface behavior, could pass every technical test. But culture operated on levels that training couldn't reach. Americans possessed knowledge that came from living within American society. Sports teams, regional customs, entertainment figures, local traditions, the kind of knowledge that emerged naturally from growing up American, that didn't get written down anywhere because everyone assumed all native-born Americans already knew it. Morrison's baseball question had revealed something crucial: cultural markers that German agents couldn't fake convincingly. A real Tigers fan would respond with specific details, personal opinions, emotional reactions that reflected years of actually following the team. Williams had given technically correct answers that were culturally hollow. Surface compliance without authentic depth. The implications went far beyond one checkpoint. If cultural knowledge could expose infiltrators more effectively than document inspection or equipment verification, then security procedures needed to change immediately. Traditional counterintelligence focused on forged papers, stolen equipment, suspicious behavior. But cultural screening opened a new category of verification: shared knowledge that foreign agents couldn't acquire through training alone. Morrison reported the incident to his company commander and recommended implementing cultural questioning at every checkpoint across the sector. At first, officers resisted. Baseball trivia seemed inappropriate for military security. But Morrison's undeniable success, combined with mounting evidence of German agents infiltrating Allied lines, eventually overcame the skepticism. By 1400 hours on December 17th, military police units across the Ardennes were using variations of cultural screening. The questions evolved quickly based on what worked in the field, but the principle stayed constant. Authentic Americans possessed cultural knowledge that couldn't be replicated through study. The casual conversation about Detroit baseball had become the foundation for what was turning into the most effective counterintelligence tool of the entire war. Major General Courtney Hicks Hodges received the consolidated intelligence reports at 1st Army Headquarters in Spa on December 18th at 1400 hours. The methodical commander who'd risen from enlisted ranks spread the documents across his field desk, studying each report with the systematic attention that had earned him respect across the European theater. 31 confirmed German infiltrators captured in 48 hours, all exposed through cultural questioning techniques that had originated from Morrison's baseball inquiry. The mathematical precision impressed Hodges more than the individual successes. Military police units across his command sector were reporting identification rates approaching statistical perfection. 94% of cultural screening questions successfully distinguished between authentic Americans and German agents. Only 2 false positives among hundreds of interrogations. Even those false positives had explanations. American soldiers who'd lived overseas for extended periods and genuinely couldn't recall recent sports statistics. Secondary questioning about childhood experiences and regional knowledge had resolved those cases. Hodges issued explicit orders that systematized cultural screening and integrated it into formal counterintelligence doctrine. Every soldier requesting passage through Allied checkpoints would face 3 standardized categories of cultural verification before clearance. The primary screen focused on sports knowledge, particularly baseball and football statistics that occupied central places in American popular culture. Secondary screens tested geographic knowledge about home regions, requiring specific details about local customs, landmarks, and cultural practices that residents would know instinctively. Tertiary screens involved entertainment references, popular songs, advertising slogans that permeated American consciousness through radio broadcasts and magazines. The systematic approach revealed how sophisticated German preparation had been. Captured documents showed that Nazi intelligence services had compiled extensive dossiers on American military organization, equipment specifications, tactical procedures. German commandos could recite field manuals, identify weapon specifications, execute military protocols with textbook accuracy. But German intelligence had fundamentally misunderstood American cultural identity. Nazi racial theories emphasized biological and geographical factors while minimizing shared experiences and unconscious knowledge. German agents had memorized facts about American society without absorbing the emotional and experiential context that made those facts meaningful to people raised in America. The effectiveness of cultural screening became apparent through specific questioning techniques refined through field testing. Sports questions revealed the deepest cultural knowledge because American men discussed athletics with passionate intensity that academic study couldn't replicate. A genuine baseball fan would immediately discuss recent games, player statistics, management decisions with authentic enthusiasm. German agents provided factually correct but emotionally flat responses that satisfied surface requirements without authentic warmth. Geographic questions exposed different cultural knowledge. Authentic Americans demonstrated intimate familiarity with their claimed hometowns through references to local businesses, neighborhood characteristics, regional terminology that appeared in no intelligence manual. When asked about home, real Americans mentioned specific high schools, local restaurants, childhood landmarks with casual familiarity. German agents delivered textbook descriptions that sounded like travel guides rather than personal memories. Cultural reference questions tested the unconscious absorption of popular culture from daily exposure to American media. Authentic Americans knew advertising jingles, radio program catchphrases, entertainment personalities not through deliberate study, but through constant background exposure. German agents who'd memorized cultural information couldn't replicate the casual automatic knowledge that genuine cultural immersion created. The psychological impact on German commandos became evident through interrogation reports. Wilhelm Schmidt, the most successful infiltrator before his detention near Spa, described to Allied officers how cultural questioning had devastated him. He'd spent 8 months in intensive training, mastering American military procedures, practicing regional accents until his English was indistinguishable from native speakers. But when questioned about childhood experiences in Milwaukee, his claimed hometown, he found himself unable to provide the detailed personal knowledge that Americans took completely for granted. He could describe Milwaukee's geography, industries, demographics with academic precision, but he couldn't recall local radio personalities, neighborhood grocery stores, high school athletic rivalries that shaped daily life for people who'd actually grown up there. The mental pressure of maintaining false identity under cultural scrutiny proved more devastating than physical interrogation. German agents trained to resist torture found themselves psychologically defeated by questions about baseball statistics and local restaurants. The knowledge gaps weren't forgotten information, but fundamental absences in their cultural education that couldn't be concealed. American military police discovered that emotional associations worked better than factual recall. When asked about hometown memories, authentic Americans displayed spontaneous emotional responses, fondness for childhood places, complaints about local weather, pride in regional achievements. German agents struggled to replicate these emotional connections because they'd never experienced the formative events that created authentic cultural identity. The success rate of cultural screening exceeded all expectations from traditional counterintelligence methods. Document verification could be defeated through forgery. Equipment inspection could be circumvented with captured materials. Behavioral observation could be overcome through intensive training, but cultural knowledge required lifetime immersion that no training program could replicate. Intelligence analysts recognized they'd discovered a new category of security verification applicable beyond immediate military operations. Cultural authentication offered potential solutions for diplomatic security, resistance movement verification, post-war occupation challenges. Any situation requiring distinction between authentic group members and infiltrators could benefit from systematic cultural knowledge testing. German intelligence services, intercepted through radio communications and prisoner interrogations, were desperately attempting to adapt to American countermeasures. Nazi intelligence was frantically compiling more comprehensive cultural information, but the task proved mathematically impossible. Building a complete cultural dossier on America required lifetime experience, not accelerated study programs. The endless stream of American popular culture flowing through radio waves, magazine pages, and countless regional variations made it impossible to track everything at once. Yet by December 20th, something remarkable had happened. The cultural questioning technique had done what months of traditional security measures couldn't accomplish. Operation Grape, the German infiltration operation that had seemed so threatening just days earlier, had been effectively stopped in its tracks. German commandos attempting to break through Allied lines discovered they were trapped in a nightmare scenario, caught between American defensive positions and cut off from their own forces behind them. These soldiers faced an impossible choice. They couldn't push forward through the cultural checkpoints, but they also couldn't retreat safely through German-held territory, where their American uniforms made them targets for their own side. The systematic effectiveness of cultural screening generated a new sense of confidence throughout the Allied command structure. Military intelligence officers began to believe they'd finally cracked the code on enemy infiltration. They thought they'd discovered a method based on something the Germans simply couldn't overcome: knowledge of everyday American life. This confidence would prove to be both a strength and a serious vulnerability. Colonel Oscar W. Koch sat in his third intelligence briefing of the day at 3:30 in the afternoon on December 20th. He held in his hands documentation that would reshape how military intelligence thought about security for the next several decades. The statistical summary spread across his desk told a story no one had anticipated. The numbers were staggering. All 150 German commandos had been accounted for. 44 had been taken prisoner. 23 had been killed while trying to escape. 83 had made it back to German lines, but not a single one had completed their assigned objectives. Operation Grape had been completely shut down through cultural screening. These weren't just tactical results, they represented something far bigger. They documented an entirely new approach to security. Koch studied the data with satisfaction. The mathematics were clean and elegant. Traditional security methods relied on examining documents, which skilled forgers could defeat, or analyzing behavior, which intensive training could overcome. Cultural screening attacked the problem differently. It exploited knowledge gaps that no amount of preparation could bridge in the time available. What had started as Morrison's simple baseball question had evolved into something sophisticated: a layered system of verification. The primary layer tested sports knowledge with questions designed to trigger genuine emotional responses that German agents couldn't convincingly fake. Secondary screening examined geographic familiarity through questions about local customs and regional terminology you'd never find in an intelligence manual. Deeper layers explored cultural references that required years of living in America to absorb naturally. Intelligence reports arriving from across Europe revealed that this success was spreading rapidly. Units in the Pacific were adapting the technique to catch Japanese infiltrators who spoke English fluently but didn't truly understand American regional differences. Office of Strategic Services operatives in occupied Europe were using similar methods to distinguish genuine resistance fighters from Gestapo agents who'd memorized anti-Nazi rhetoric without grasping the cultural context behind authentic resistance. Even Soviet intelligence, learning about American success through diplomatic channels, was developing parallel techniques to identify Western agents operating in Eastern European territories. The principle seemed revolutionary: cultural authentication as a fundamental counterintelligence breakthrough that could work across different countries and different wars. The statistics painted a stunning picture of transformation. Before cultural screening began, German infiltrators had achieved about an 87% success rate in initially penetrating Allied lines, with roughly 34% completing their assigned sabotage missions. After systematic cultural questioning started on December 18th, detection rates climbed to 89% within 24 hours of first checkpoint encounters. Mission completion rates dropped to absolute zero. The change was so dramatic that intelligence analysts began writing reports suggesting that similar German operations would become mathematically impossible. Training manuals were already being written with confident language, stating that no foreign agent could successfully impersonate an American soldier for more than 72 hours under systematic cultural screening. The confidence was spreading through the military like electricity. American forces believed they'd achieved a decisive superiority in counterintelligence through superior understanding of American cultural markers. Koch recognized the broader implications as he prepared his final assessment for headquarters. This was more than tactical innovation. It revealed fundamental truths about national identity that could be weaponized in future conflicts. American cultural knowledge operated on multiple levels simultaneously, from surface facts that could be memorized to deeper associations that required a lifetime of living American life to truly absorb. The captured German commandos provided haunting evidence of how effective the technique was. Interrogation transcripts showed the mental deterioration of highly trained soldiers, broken not by physical torture, but by questions about childhood memories and local grocery stores. Men prepared to resist extreme pain found themselves psychologically destroyed by inquiries about high school athletic rivalries and neighborhood names that exposed their artificial identities. Wilhelm Schmidt, the most successful infiltrator before his capture, described the experience as more devastating than combat stress itself. The constant fear of exposure through cultural questioning created psychological pressure that exceeded anything he'd experienced maintaining a false identity through traditional interrogation. German agents began avoiding American checkpoints altogether, effectively trapping themselves in shrinking pockets of contested territory. They could neither advance nor safely retreat. The success, however, bred dangerous overconfidence. Allied commanders began viewing cultural screening as a permanent solution to infiltration. Intelligence briefings emphasized its spectacular effectiveness while glossing over potential countermeasures the Germans might develop. Staff officers drafted recommendations for extending cultural screening into diplomatic verification, immigration processing, and occupation administration. The technique appeared to offer foolproof methods for distinguishing authentic Americans from foreign agents in any environment. But unknown to Allied intelligence, German forces were already responding systematically. Wehrmacht and SS intelligence services began cataloging every cultural question used at Allied checkpoints within days of first learning about the successful infiltrator detections. Every baseball statistic, geographic detail, and popular culture reference mentioned during interrogations was being recorded and analyzed for future training. The Americans had won a complete tactical victory, but they'd simultaneously handed their enemies a comprehensive intelligence briefing about how Americans thought and what Americans valued. The questions that exposed German infiltrators revealed exactly how Americans conceptualized their own cultural identity. German training camps were already implementing enhanced cultural education programs based on captured American materials. Former American prisoners of war were being forced to serve as cultural instructors, providing the authentic regional knowledge and emotional associations that previous training had lacked. The systematic German response would take years to fully implement, but the foundation was being laid even as American commanders celebrated their unprecedented success. The confidence generated by cultural screening's triumph was already being systematically undermined. The shocking reports began arriving through encrypted cables on January 15, 1945. Allied intelligence officers received disturbing information from Soviet units operating along the Eastern Front. German infiltrators captured in Russian-held territory were demonstrating detailed knowledge of American popular culture that exceeded anything the original Operation Grape commandos had possessed. These agents could discuss baseball statistics like lifelong fans. They could recite advertising jingles from American radio broadcasts. They could provide intimate details about regional customs that would have exposed their predecessors immediately. The realization struck like artillery fire. The Germans hadn't just adapted to cultural screening, they'd systematized the learning process with characteristic German efficiency. Captured documents revealed the scope of what German intelligence had built. 400-page training manuals covered American regional dialects, sports history, entertainment figures, and local customs. All of it compiled through systematic analysis of every question used at Allied checkpoints during the Battle of the Bulge. German intelligence had transformed American cultural screening into comprehensive educational curricula. Training facilities in occupied Poland operated mock American environments where German agents spent 6 months immersed in recreated American cultural experiences. The facilities contained imported American magazines dating back to 1935. They had captured radio equipment broadcasting American programming. Detailed recreations of American neighborhoods included period-appropriate furnishings and regional decorations. Most disturbing was the revelation that former American prisoners of war were serving as involuntary cultural instructors in these facilities, coerced into providing the authentic emotional associations and unconscious knowledge that surface-level training couldn't deliver. These American soldiers taught German agents not just facts about American culture, but the emotional responses and personal connections that made cultural knowledge convincing under interrogation. The psychological impact on American military police who'd pioneered cultural screening was profound. Technical Sergeant Morrison himself received classified briefings on German countermeasures that revealed how thoroughly his breakthrough had been neutralized. The technique that seemed unbeatable in December was already obsolete by February. Morrison's personal correspondence with his wife captured the emotional weight of this realization. He wrote that he'd thought they'd found something the Germans could never counter, but it turned out they'd just found something the Germans hadn't thought to fake yet. He wondered if there was anything about being American that couldn't be taught if someone was desperate enough to learn it. Yet from the wreckage of tactical disappointment emerged strategic transformation that would reshape intelligence operations for decades. The rapid German adaptation to cultural screening inadvertently validated three fundamental principles that became cornerstones of modern counterintelligence doctrine. These principles transcended their specific World War II context and established theoretical foundations remaining relevant in contemporary intelligence work. The first principle established cultural knowledge as layered intelligence, requiring systematic analysis rather than intuitive questioning. Modern security clearance investigations evolved directly from this insight, incorporating psychological evaluation techniques that probe for unconscious cultural patterns rather than surface facts. Immigration interviews, diplomatic vetting procedures, and corporate security screenings all trace their methodology to this recognition that authentic identity requires deeper verification than documents or behavioral observation. The second principle recognized that successful long-term deception requires actually living the assumed identity rather than simply memorizing its characteristics. Intelligence agencies worldwide implemented deep cover training programs requiring agents to spend years establishing authentic cultural credentials before operational deployment. The modern concept of extended identity immersion emerged from German success in countering American cultural screening through comprehensive cultural education rather than superficial preparation. The third principle established continuous evolution as essential for effective counterintelligence. The rapid German adaptation taught American intelligence services that any technique, regardless of initial effectiveness, must be constantly refined and updated. Modern biometric systems, behavioral analysis programs, and psychological evaluation methods all incorporate this principle of continuous development in response to evolving threats. The institutional transformation extended beyond military intelligence to civilian security agencies established for post-war operations. The Federal Bureau of Investigation incorporated cultural screening principles into domestic security investigations. The Central Intelligence Agency, created in 1947, built its fundamental training doctrine around lessons learned from the Battle of the Bulge cultural screening experience. More significantly, the success and subsequent adaptation revealed profound truths about cultural identity, transcending immediate security applications. The American discovery that authentic belonging couldn't be faked through study alone had implications for understanding community formation, social integration, and the invisible bonds connecting individuals to larger cultural groups. Cultural screening exposed both the universality and individuality of human cultural experience. The shared knowledge connecting Americans also distinguished them from other populations, creating verification systems simultaneously inclusive for authentic members and exclusive for outsiders attempting infiltration. This paradox became central to post-war research in sociology, anthropology, and psychology, exploring mechanisms of cultural identity formation. The technique, beginning with Morrison's baseball question, evolved into systematic methodology for distinguishing authentic from manufactured identity across numerous contexts. Post-war refugee screening, immigration processing, and diplomatic verification all incorporated principles derived from wartime cultural screening. The recognition that cultural knowledge operated on multiple simultaneous levels became fundamental to understanding how human communities maintain coherence while remaining open to legitimate newcomers. The lasting impact extended to contemporary security challenges emerging decades after the war's end. Modern airport security protocols, online identity verification systems, and social media authentication processes all apply fundamental insights discovered through cultural screening. The principle that authentic human connection runs deeper than any disguise remains central to security methodology in an era of sophisticated technological deception. The story of cultural screening's rise and adaptation illustrates the perpetual evolution of intelligence techniques. No methodology remains effective indefinitely, but the principles underlying successful techniques often transcend their specific applications. The Battle of the Bulge cultural screening experience demonstrated that sophisticated deception could be defeated through understanding of authentic human community formation, even as it revealed the temporary nature of any tactical advantage in the ongoing competition between deception and detection. The legacy lives on, not in specific questions about baseball statistics, but in the recognition that authentic human belonging creates knowledge patterns that cannot be replicated through study alone, making cultural identity both humanity's greatest vulnerability and its ultimate protection against those seeking to exploit human trust through systematic deception.